The smell of fresh bread and old wood lingered in my modest little kitchen as I stood by the window, sipping a lukewarm cup of tea. Outside, the early morning sunlight poured through the lace curtains, dancing on the wooden floorboards that had seen decades of my life. To anyone passing by, my home looked ordinary, just another small, aging house on the quiet edge of town. But to me, it was a place of memories, sacrifice, and secrets I had kept tucked away for years. I wasn't poor. In fact, I had more money than most people could ever dream of. I had built a fortune, brick by brick, after my husband left me with nothing but a baby girl in my arms and a world that didn't care whether I survived or not. He had chosen wealth over love, trading me for a woman whose family connections promised him a more comfortable life. That betrayal hardened me, but it also fueled me. While others assumed I lived simply because I had no choice, the truth was different. Behind the modest curtains of my life were investments, businesses, and properties that bore my name. The quiet strength I carried wasn't from what I showed the world, but from what I chose to hide. I wanted my daughter to grow up humble, to value people over money. But somewhere along the way, I lost her. Sophia was the light of my life, the only reason I woke up every morning during those dark years when I felt like the world had swallowed me whole. I worked 3 jobs just to keep us afloat, often skipping meals so she could eat. Every success I built was for her. Every late night, every risk, every tear I swallowed instead of crying out loud. I wanted her to have what I never did, security. Yet as she grew older, I noticed something that broke me more than any of life's hardships ever could. She began to look down on me. It started subtly, with offhand comments about my clothes or my old car. Later, it grew into outright embarrassment whenever I showed up at her school events in my simple dresses, while other mothers wore designer labels and carried handbags worth more than my entire grocery bill. I thought it was just a phase, the insecurity of a teenager trying to fit in. But the phase never ended. Now, as her wedding day approached, the cracks between us had widened into an unbridgeable gap. She was marrying into a wealthy family, a family that looked at me with polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. I knew what they thought of me, the poor mother, clinging to the fringes of their perfect, glittering world. "Mom, please don't embarrass me," Sophia had told me one afternoon during the wedding preparations. Her voice was sharp, rehearsed, as though she had thought long and hard about how to phrase it. "This is a big day for me. Everyone will be there. Just don't say too much, okay, and wear something decent, nothing cheap looking." I remember standing there, holding the fabric of my old navy blue dress in my hands. It wasn't fancy, but it was neat. It was the same dress I had worn at her high school graduation, the one I bought after saving up for months. At the time, she had smiled at me in it, but now it wasn't good enough, of course, sweetheart. I replied softly, swallowing the lump in my throat. I didn't argue. I never argued with her anymore. She didn't know that hidden in my safe were bank documents and property deeds that could buy her entire wedding 10 times over. She didn't know that the cheap car I drove was paid for in cash, while I had a luxury vehicle sitting untouched in storage, a gift I never revealed. She didn't know because I had never wanted her to measure me, or anyone by money, but she was already measuring me. As I set my teacup down and stared at the fading steam, I realized I was preparing myself, not just for her wedding, but for the pain I knew was waiting for me there. A mother's heart knows when her child no longer sees her as enough, and I had felt that shift long ago. Still, I told myself I would smile. I would sit quietly, clap when expected, and pretend I didn't notice the whispers. Because that was what love looked like. It wasn't about pride or appearances. It was about showing up, no matter how unwelcomed you felt. I glanced at the envelope tucked away in my drawer, the one that held a check large enough to change her life forever. I had planned to give it to her after the ceremony as a wedding gift, but for some reason, my fingers hesitated on the edge of the drawer. Something in me whispered, "Not yet, wait." And so I did. The church bells rang softly in the distance, their sound swallowed by the chatter and laughter of guests arriving in glittering gowns and pressed tuxedos. The wedding was everything my daughter had dreamed of, extravagant, dazzling, the kind of ceremony that belonged on the glossy pages of a magazine. White roses lined the aisle, crystal chandeliers glimmered overhead, and a string quartet played as if the world itself had been invited to watch this fairy tale unfold. I sat quietly near the back, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my navy blue dress pressed carefully and paired with my only pearl necklace. I didn't mind the simplicity. I had always believed elegance came from dignity, not price tags. But as I glanced at the crowd, I could feel the stares. Some were curious, others pitying, and a few barely concealed their judgment. The groom's family had spared no expense. His mother floated down the aisle earlier in a designer gown dripping with diamonds. His father spoke loudly about business deals, shaking hands as though the wedding were a networking event. They looked at me only briefly, with those tight smiles that seemed to say, "You're not one of us, but we'll tolerate you today." And then my daughter appeared. Sophia looked breathtaking in her lace gown, her eyes shining as she walked toward her future. My heart swelled with pride despite everything. She was still my little girl, the baby I once cradled through sleepless nights. For a moment I forgot the distance between us, forgot the sharp words, and simply admired the woman she had become. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and applause. Soon we were at the reception, seated in a glittering hall with tables heavy with food and champagne. I sat quietly at my table, watching her laugh with her new family, wondering if she even noticed my presence. Then came the speeches. The groom's father spoke first, raising his glass high. He praised his son's accomplishments, spoke of their family's wealth, and welcomed Sophia into their legacy. The crowd clapped politely, glasses clinking. Next, the groom spoke. Sweet words of love, promises of forever, and gratitude for everyone present. The hall filled with warmth, and I clapped with tears in my eyes. And then my daughter stood. Her smile was radiant as she took the microphone, her voice carrying across the room with practiced ease. She thanked her new in-laws for their generosity, thanked her friends for their support, and then her eyes landed on me. "And of course," she said, pausing dramatically, "I should thank my mother for being here tonight. I know it wasn't easy for her to attend such a grand event." There was a ripple of laughter from the guests, soft but unmistakable. My stomach tightened. She may not have much to give financially. Sophia continued, her tone dripping with mock sweetness, "But she gave me life, and I suppose that's enough. I mean, we all know she's, well, broke." The laughter this time was louder. Heads turned toward me, some pitying, others smirking. The words cut deeper than any knife. I sat frozen, my hands trembling in my lap, forcing a smile I didn't feel. Still, she went on. She did her best with what little she had. And even though she couldn't help much with the wedding, her presence today means something. She ended with a flourish, raising her glass as though she had offered a compliment instead of humiliation. The crowd clapped. Some people glanced at me again, whispering. My face burned, but I remained still, my dignity wrapped around me like a fragile shield. I thought of the nights I worked until dawn, sewing clothes for extra money. I thought of the meals I skipped so she could eat. I thought of the years I wore the same pair of shoes until they had holes, just so she could walk into school wearing something new. And here she was, standing in front of hundreds of people, calling me broke. My heart should have broken, but instead, something inside me hardened. As I looked at her, smiling so proudly, I realized she had no idea who I really was. She didn't know the empire I had built quietly, the fortune tucked behind my modest life. She didn't know that I could have paid for every rose, every chandelier, every diamond in this hall with a single signature. And she didn't deserve to know, not yet. The hall was still buzzing with laughter and applause when I rose from my seat. Slowly, deliberately, I smoothed my dress and walked toward the stage. My heels clicked against the polished floor, each step steady, controlled. The crowd began to quiet, curious now. My daughter looked at me with a flicker of surprise, perhaps even irritation. I smiled gently, the kind of smile that carried no anger, only calm resolve.